We're heading back to the pulpy atomic era of 1950s sci-fi. An alien ship crash lands on Earth and the inhabitant begins taking over people in a small desert town. Does this one hold up with the best classics of the era? Let's find out as we discuss It Came from Outer Space. Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment, and that title has never been more apt than when we're doing a movie from the 1950s. I am Peter, and joining me, as always, is David.
I come in peace.
This is a science fiction movie podcast. We get together, we talk about a movie. We had a vote on our Patreon over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, and there was a 50s vote with 3 movies from the decade, and the winner was It Came from Outer Space. So that is what we're going to talk about today. So...
In stunning 3-dimensional film.
Well, I didn't watch it in 3D, but I mean...
Same. Nah. I wonder if that's available anywhere. Do you think there's still a preserved copy of the 3D version?
It wouldn't surprise me if they converted it back in like 2010 to 2012 when like the new version of 3D, like they were going... Because I know Friday the 13th Part 3 got like a modern 3D like Blu-ray disc where you could watch it in the new format in 3D. I suspect that it might have had that treatment, but I don't know. I don't know for sure.
Yeah. Same. I mean, it's an old Universal film, so if they kept on to the negatives, I don't know how good Universal was at preserving all their old stuff. I think pretty decent.
Well, given that I watched this in a pretty damn good-looking remastered 4K, I'm going to say they probably have the materials sitting around. Yeah. Now, maybe they only have the 2D version sitting around. Maybe the 3D version's like somewhere in a dungeon somewhere that no one can find. I don't know.
Just some random film projector home in like California or something.
Some pervert watching.
Yes.
Watching It Came from Outer Space, and I came from my couch.
This is the kind of stuff that's usually reserved for Patreon, but I guess we're just giving it to the masses. All right.
I should have said penis. That'd have been funnier. I should have just said it came from penis. Oh, it doesn't matter. Oh, well. So welcome everyone. We'll start spoiler free as we always do. We'll give you some warning before we get to spoilers. Just before we start, I'll just remind you that you can support the show over at Patreon. You can also hit the like button on YouTube. That helps us out a bunch. I'll tell you more about the bonus shows you can get on Patreon though at the end of the show. But we'll get into it. Obviously, we don't do a lot, but it's not a frequent thing to go back to the 50s. Not that there isn't sci-fi movies worth doing, there absolutely is, but quite frankly they don't get watched as much on YouTube, so it's more of a every now and then we'll do one as opposed to we'll focus on it like extensively for a while because the numbers would all tank. But I do like going back and doing some old school stuff from before the 70s, because I think 70s onwards is kind of where the real interest, widely speaking, kind of starts, because that's where sci-fi got a bit grittier, a bit more mature.
It's after 1969. We actually made it into space, and it's like, oh wait, hold on, this is feasible. Let's go nuts.
Yeah, it's just tackling darker subjects, stuff like that. Not that there's not some. Obviously, there are some absolute fantastic gems in the 50s. Day They Are Stood Still, and the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers stand out in my mind, both of which has been done on the show before. But this, I think, is definitely more in B movie territory. I would say it's not as meaningful. It doesn't really have a great message or anything like that. I think it kind of broadly could go into a message, but it never really quite takes the leap.
Yeah, watching this movie, I kept expecting it to do like the communism thing, or like we humans shouldn't be focusing on so much war or whatever. But like by the time it hit the end of the movie, it was kind of just this bland sort of middle ground of like, I mean, humans are kind of dicks, but also, who cares?
Yeah, I mean, we'll get into everything. Obviously, it's about a ship that crash lands on Earth, and the alien entity that is on board, which never gets a name, I don't think, is doing stuff, and there's one astronomer who's noticing that something's afoot, but no one believes him, and that's the general premise of the movie. So we'll get into everything. You kind of alluded to it there a little bit, but David, what did you think of It Came from Outer Space?
I gotta say, just not in terms of release, because in terms of release, we have had a couple bigger fares recently, but in terms of filming time, we have had a very long run of not so great movies. Like we've
Well,
done Prometheus, Phantom Menace, stuff like that.
Yeah, but those are big hitters though. They're big discussion movies.
They are. But I'm gonna go into this saying this movie, it reminded me, especially because I think the last thing we did was Rebel Moon Part 2, which is this one had really decent acting. And I almost forgot what that was like.
I thought you were going to say something negative there, but you upped it a compliment.
Yeah, no, I honestly, God, like that's the movie started, and there's this like long scene that introduces the astronomer and his girlfriend, and I'm engaged. Like this has engaging characters to it, and I think that it does a good job of getting us interested in what the story is and building it up and stuff like that. I think my biggest problem with it is it didn't quite deliver. By the time we hit the end of the movie, it felt like there was much more that could have been said, that it really could have gone into, but ultimately it just kind of fell a little bit flat on what it was either trying to say or what it could have said. I will say, special effects wise though, there's not many, but with what little things it does a really good job at it. I think that it was a very solid special effects film for what you saying is a B movie. I think that it's one of the better ones by far. So overall, it's not a negative. I can't say it's like a standout positive either.
Well, when I say B movie, I'm not really talking about the quality of like the budget for the effects and things like that. The B movie is more the fact that it's not really saying anything. It's more just a schlocky movie that's trying to have fun with its premise. And I don't think it's a great one at that. I think it's okay, but I think for me it suffers from never really settling into a core premise that then the plot can play out with. It keeps kind of like going backwards and forwards. There's a lot of repetition in like going back to this one spot in the desert, going back out of town over and over again. Characters make decisions at points for seemingly no reason just to advance the plot, and it feels kind of sloppy from that perspective. It is based on a story, or at least the credit was story by Ray Bradbury, who is a very famous science fiction writer, but he's not the screenplay writer. And I do wonder if the screenplay writer is the weak link there, because it feels like maybe the basic concept came up from Bradbury, and then this other writer took it and said, okay, I have to like pad this out to 80 minutes because it's a movie. And we get some of this weird back and forth where like I kept waiting for its main hook to kind of sink in, right? You know, like if you're going to be a movie about, okay, this is about someone seeing something and no one else believing them and it being about the paranoia, then focus in on that and make that what the movie is. It never quite does that, though. It does it for a little bit, but it never really goes serious with it. If you're going to make it be a movie about people disappearing, then really focus in on that. But it kind of like wishy-washies that very quickly as well. If you're going to be a movie that's kind of Body Snatchers-esque, then do that. I'm using this is before Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That was a few years later.
Right.
But there's a little bit of that you could compare with that, and it's notable compared to that movie. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is absolutely full of commentary, even though the director claims that there wasn't. There absolutely is. He's talking nonsense.
He was still affected by the culture he was in at the time. Clearly, there was some level of commentary.
That movie is like one of the richest films from the 50s in terms of like social commentary, and to have like the main people behind it go, no, we were just making a fun movie. There's no comment. I was like, what are you talking about? It's so heavy.
Oh God.
And all that's to say that this never feels like it really. But in two ways, it never feels like it latches onto a core idea for the plot to revolve around, so that we can have fun with the mechanics of that, even just on a simple B movie level. But it also, another level up, it never quite latches onto something where it feels like it's starting to actually say something about humanity. There is like a sort of like, there's kind of a problem that's introduced towards the end in the last 20 minutes, which it feels like, oh, that could be where your moral comes from. But even that, I feel like it never actually feels like it says something with it. It just kind of is there for there to be some conflict. So we'll get into all that in spoilers, of course, but that's my main thing with it. I'm not saying I had a bad time watching it. That said, though, I was finding my attention drifting at times, and I do feel this movie is the perfect, like, I know Netflix are actually trying to make second screen material, which is a dumb thing to actually try to do, but I feel like movies like this from this era are perfect second screen material while you're doing something else. have this on, because you can basically miss 5 minutes at times and not miss a single important detail, and you'll be fine.
I will say the only thing, because my attention was drifting as well. It wasn't, I wasn't gone for minutes at a time, but there were points where, I was doing other stuff on another screen.
Well, for the record, nor was I, because I was reviewing it. If I wasn't reviewing it, though, I probably would have been letting my attention drift for that long at a time.
But I will say part of the problem I had just specifically for this movie is that there's maybe one or two male characters in this movie that don't sound the exact same as every other male character. So when I heard somebody talk and I wasn't like looking at the screen, I was like, I have no idea who this is right now. This could be anybody.
Yeah, I mean, the main characters, you got your astronomer, sorry, I almost said astronomer, who's, was it Putnam, John Putnam.
Yes.
As this character.
I think they just call him Johnny, like, over and over again.
Yeah. We're probably just going to keep saying astronomer, let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But he's our main character, and he's got his girlfriend, Ellen, who's played by Barbara Rush. Mm-hmm. And she's very much a lady from this era of cinema where she's there to scream at things even when nothing like that exciting's actually happened. She's there to be worried. God. She's there to be rescued. It is very much, the hollow, like, female lead.
I loved her screams, though, because, like, even when something horrible was happening, she saved the screams for when nothing was happening. Like, there's one point where, like, a little boy dressed up in a spaceman suit knocks on their door, and the moment she opens the door and sees it, she just lets out a full tilt scream. And, like, I'm like, seriously? You think a tiny little astronaut this tall is going to be the thing you freak out about?
Maybe she's just scared of, like, things that are smaller than her.
In that case, I would hate to see her school class, because that's literally her job, is to teach tiny children.
Yeah, but she has power over them. She knows that.
Oh yeah, she walks in and she's like, "Don't scream, don't scream. You can flunk them all, Ellen. It's okay."
Or maybe she does, but that's how she punishes them if they misbehave. She just gets up in their face and screams at them until they stop doing whatever they're doing.
Jesus, that would get me to fall in line immediately. That's horrifying.
And then our third main character is the sheriff, who is like an old friend of Ellen's. Like, he sort of like looked after her when she was growing up, so he also is invested in her safety. That's important for reasons.
I think they explicitly say that the previous sheriff was Ellen's father or something like that.
Yeah, that sounds right, yeah. And then there's a bunch of like just sort of like side characters who are relatively important in that they pop up here or there and they're like involved in the plot in some way. The only one that I want to point out, though, because we'll talk about most of them in spoilers.
I know what you're going to say.
I want to talk about for some randomly out of nowhere, there's a sultry blonde secretary who shows up for one scene, and it stuck out how much she was standing there doing her best Marilyn Monroe impression the entire time. Mm-hmm. But what really stuck out to me is at the end when they do the credits and they do the classic thing where as their name comes up, you see a clip of them.
Yep.
In the movie, like the end of Predator, right? Which I know is like a weird example to use, but it's the one that I grew up watching, right?
Yeah.
We get that, and it goes through, the three main cast, and it gives you like two of the more important B characters. And then for some reason, the last person to get the visual credit of like having their face on screen is this blonde woman. And I'm like, she was barely, she was practically an extra. Why is there so much attention being given to this woman?
So, trivia-wise, and this is not something that's confirmed, but trivia-wise on IMDb is basically Universal thought, this is our answer for Marilyn Monroe. So we're going to push her. We're going to push her into stardom. We're going to give her a big credit here so that people notice her. And then we're going to just really sell her down the line. So this was kind of just the start of that. I don't know whether or not it was successful, but looking at this filmography, no.
I was going to say, let's click on her and find out how much she's done. I mean, she has 66 credits. That ain't too bad.
Yeah, but just looking after It Came From Outer Space, you got The Golden Blade, The Glass Web, Cult of the Cobra, and then a bunch of like single episodes on TV shows. Okay. So I don't think it really was a successful bid by them.
Well, maybe she didn't quite have the acting chops to actually be the new star they wanted.
Yeah, possibly not. Regardless, it was very strange to see it there because there are probably like 7 other characters I would put above her in the pecking order to show up in the final credits, but then there she is.
Yeah, for some reason she gets this billing. I mean, it's not top billing, but it's like notably above a lot of other characters that had more lines. And
yeah. Also, I think you pointed out every other character uses like a clip from the movie. She has her own like specially shot like headshot turn thing because she was in so little of the movie.
This is a little demo reel like moment for her at the end to just show how pretty she is for the producers.
God, it was so weird.
Yeah, that was a bit strange. So yeah, this is directed by Jack Arnold, who's a name that I've definitely heard of a bunch of times. Did a lot of movies back in this sort of time, notably Creature from the Black Lagoon. So clearly they thought, oh hey, we'll get someone who already did a big sci-fi movie, and he went on to do The Incredible Shrinking Man, which is actually one of the other movies that was in the vote. And I've seen that, and I remember it being a fun movie, but it's been a long time, so we'll eventually get to it and see if it holds up. But yeah, did a lot of movies in this kind of vein around the 50s. He was working all the way up at the 70s, but it looks of it. So
yeah, no, I'm looking. This Island Earth is very reminiscent of this. Tarantula is obviously a big one for like just like imagery of sci-fi.
Yeah, very good. Yeah. So
he's definitely a big name in this sort of field of movies.
For sure. So it's funny because it feels like all those other ones that just, well, maybe not This Island Earth, but all those other ones we mentioned, Incredible Shrinking Man, Tarantula, I feel like they have clear hooks, even just from the titles. I understand what the selling point of the movie is, whereas this is a bit more vague. Obviously, yes, something comes from space, but it doesn't really tell you how the movie's going to... Whereas Tarantula, okay, it's a giant spider. It's going to be like a kaiju movie with a big spider. I can see the fun in that. Incredible Shrinking Man, it's going to be like a much older school take of like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but with this guy running around from whatever. So... I can see what the selling point of this is, and I think that the thing with this movie that sticks out to me is that even by the end of the movie, I'm still not sure what they were trying to sell this on.
Yeah, I wonder if it's kind of just a little schism between the kind of movies that this director was making and the more high concept stuff that Ray Bradbury does. And maybe there was just something that was kind of lost in translation between the two, where he didn't know how to translate over some of those bigger ideas that would have been present there.
Possibly, like I say, the screenplay writer might have a hand in that more so than the director, because I mean it's directed well enough. Like I don't really feel any problems with that side of it. I mean,
but I'm just saying there's nothing in his filmography that makes me think that he could handle something like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, like level of talking about culture and symbolism that way.
I also wonder if like this, Universal were pushing this as a 3D release when that was like the hot new thing.
Yeah.
I wonder if maybe there was like a rush to get it done, and so it's kind of sloppy from like a plotting perspective and things like that.
I mean, I'll give him credit. At no point was there like a kid with a yo-yo just aiming at the camera the whole way through. There were a few small effects that had that sort of thing where I can see where the 3D would have come into play, but there was nothing that felt outlandishly like they were just cashing in on the effect.
Which is almost weird, actually, thinking about it, because, like, especially from like a B movie from the 50s, you'd think that they'd be milking it every chance they... Like, hey, this is why you came to see this, is for the 3D effects, but... and maybe that's why, like, they didn't maybe bother doing, like, an updated 3D version, because they're like, well, to be honest, it didn't really make use of it, or whatever, So, it's a strange little circumstance. It feels like one of those movies that's in between the other movies that worked out better. It feels like a bit of a hodgepodge of, like, just some fine ideas and decent enough cast, a good director for this type of movie, but just all the pieces didn't quite fit together. And by the end, you're kind of left thinking, well, okay, but what was it really getting at? And it never really quite got there. Because, it's the sort of thing where sometimes... You get like a dream project where it's like, oh, the hot director. You get like, like a Ridley Scott's making something with a big star. Pick a big star. And while Ridley Scott makes good movies, like every 2 or 3 movies he makes a complete stinker, and it's one of those. And there's not that this is a complete stinker. That's a bit harsh in this case. I just mean, sometimes all the pieces just don't quite fit together, and I feel like that's what this kind of is. But it's not a bad watch either. Like I say, put it on while you're doing something else.
I mean, this is one of, I know you're not as big into like musical theater or anything like that, but this is one of the few movies that was actually referenced by name in the theme song for Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Okay.
Because it references, what else was there? There was Flash Gordon. There was, I think, Day the Earth Stood Still was in there as well. But this was one of the ones that made that level of cut. So clearly it did have some level of impact or some level of notoriety in B-movie circles. So it's, again, it's not a completely just dismiss it sort of thing, but it is still something that it feels like you said, there's something missing to it. It doesn't have that thing that allows it to stand the test of time the way that other sort of B movies of the era did. Like you said, Creature of the Black Lagoon was one of his previous projects here. That one, everyone still knows. That's just been accepted into cultural osmosis. I feel like this one's a bit more on the outskirts of what may or may not be remembered.
I think the reason why it maybe get remembered enough to pop up in a song like that is purely just because of the title. Because it is a good title.
True, yeah.
It sounds good. It came from outer space. As much as I was saying, you don't really know exactly what the hook is based on the title. I don't think you have to from just the title, but the poster should do the rest of the lifting, right?
Yeah.
And I don't feel like this does. It just shows you've got a bunch of characters just kind of, you see an eye, sure, but it's mostly just characters like sort of looking scared up at something.
I mean, half the poster is dedicated to it being in 3D, so that's already something that's been lost to time.
Yep. And it almost feels like the fact that the main creature has just a big eye sort of in its middle of its design feels almost just like a meta thing of like, hey, you're here for a 3D movie, so this whole thing's based about a creature who has an eye. We're going to do these POV shots where you've got this like sort of bubble effect around the lens.
I also think that might be a detriment to the movie as well. I mean, we'll get into the specifics of it, but this doesn't really give a whole lot of focus to the creature itself. And I think that in terms of, public awareness and like the way you remember the movie, if you don't actually get to see the creature all that much in its natural form, then it's not something that's really going to stick in your mind that well, Like if you told me right now to sketch out what this creature looked like, I could give you a very vague outline, but it's not going to be anywhere as detailed as like the creature from the Black Lagoon or something like that. It's something that is a lot more just unimportant to the movie.
I feel like you don't even necessarily need to see it any more than you do in the movie. It just has to be kind of the focal point where it, like I say, it kind of flips into this like more about the people in the town as opposed to the creature and there's people disappearing. So we're talking about that more so than we are about the fact that the creature looks the way it does. And like, it's not a monster movie. It doesn't play like a monster movie.
Yeah, but I feel like the name of it implies that it like, you come for a monster movie, like a tarantula, that's monster. I feel like it's that sort of vibe to it.
Yeah, I'm not denying that that's what the title makes it sound like. I'm saying the movie itself, though, isn't that when, I'm not saying it shouldn't be. I'm saying it probably should be, in fact. I'm saying it would probably be more fun if it was just a monster movie with this thing. Right. But, it is what it is. So, spoilers then, I guess. We good for, I think so.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can't. The only other thing that we somewhat talk about occasionally is score, but I mean, this didn't really stand out to me all that much. It was present, but it wasn't great.
There's some theremin, as you expect from the time period, but that's about it, really. So, yeah, spoilers for It Came From Outer Space. You have been warned. We do start off with, basically the special effect of the crash landing of the ship. With the big title coming out. I honestly, the only thing that felt like it was making use of the 3D to me was the fact that all the title and credits at the end were in like I don't even know what you call it, but like where they're blocky and they're sort of like they've got a bit of depth to them. That felt like other movies would use that even if they're not in 3D just because they like that style. It felt like here though it was specifically because it's 3D, so it's like the text is coming out at you.
Yeah, there were a few other like special effects things. Later on, we get a laser beam that I think definitely would have been a 3D effect. The way that they angled it like towards the camera, but yeah, it didn't really feel like any of the acting or blocking in this movie was built with 3D in mind. It felt very standard, all things considered.
Yeah, that laser beam's very cute, by the way. It's just a cartoon. It's a line of a cartoon. It's adorable.
It's coming out of like a magic wand at that. It's not even like a gun. It's just like she holds up a stick and there it is.
Yeah, so we're introduced to our couple, our astronomer and his girlfriend, They might be engaged. Honestly, it doesn't really matter. But they're talking about, oh, maybe she's going to move in soon or something like that. They're talking about the house and he's fixing it up and whatever.
You can tell this is during like Hays Code era, just because of how any other movie they would be kissing on each other at least once, but instead for this entire opening thing, it's just the epitome of sexual tension without them ever actually doing anything. Like the school teacher's just all up on him, just being like, well, I wish that something would happen tonight. Maybe I should wish on a star. And he just goes, yeah, you do that.
I mean, yeah, it's just very of its time. You know, I feel like I don't want to say that too much when I'm talking about a movie that's this old, but like I think the way the characters interact and talk to each other, both in terms of romantic relationships, but also just in terms of how characters debate things or get into arguments, it's all very dated in the way they actually talk to each other. It's movies from this time period are not written to try and mimic realism with how people speak to each other. They're written in a way where characters talk. It's kind of the same way with comic books. If you go back and read a Silver Age comic book, they don't talk in a natural way. They have this kind of stilted, like fake way of talking to each other. And the same true. It
feels like that sort of like stage play idea. You know, you get up and you give your soliloquy sort of thing. It's not something where it's the naturalistic feel.
But yeah, basically they're just talking about the fact that he's sold an article to a magazine and he's getting some money, and then there's a flash of light in the sky. They look over and there's, he's like, oh, a meteor, a big one. And he gets all excited. He's looking through his telescope. And lo and behold, in the morning, they don't even drive down there. They go to like the airfield that's nearby and get this other guy to fly them in what I'm going to call the convertible helicopter.
That's fair. That's a reasonable. It's a crop dusting place, so it just feels like a bare bones sort of like, we only have exactly what we need and nothing more here.
It was because, I mean, obviously I'm not saying that there's an actual top that comes in, but it's because there was like a front window, but then nothing above it. So it just made me think, oh, it's a helicopter, but it's a convertible.
Pretty much. It felt like something he built in his garage and the FAA just didn't exist yet. Where it's like, yeah, sure, whatever, go for it.
Or he's just, they'll never come out to the desert in Arizona. It's fine. Yeah. They'll never find me.
As long as they don't actually crash into a plane, everything's good.
He'd have to fly much higher to do that anyway. He keeps it low to the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think he literally had a company of like crop dusting, I think is what he usually uses for, which I think has an average height of probably about 100 feet, not even. Yeah.
Well, real planes are like thousands of feet in the air. Well, obviously when they're landing, but I'm assuming he's not next to an airport.
Out here in the middle of nowhere, Arizona, yep.
I don't even think the train's been built through this town yet.
Nah. One day they're going to get a post office, and that's going to be real peachy keen.
So they go out to this big crater where the thing landed, and our main dude's like, hey, right, you stay up here, honey, and you stay, and the other guy's like, yeah, I'll stay here too. And he goes down, and he climbs down this big crater. And what I love about this, in terms of continuity, is that when you get a big wide shot of this crater, it does look quite good. But it looks like when it cuts to him climbing down parts of it, you can tell that, oh, this is nowhere near as steep as that wide shot. This is a very different thing you're climbing down. Because especially since it's still like, in a modern movie that's trying to take this more serious, right? What this scene would be is that they'd show up with climbing gear, and you get a scene of them rappelling down the steep thing, right? And that would be the big budget way of doing it.
Yes.
Instead, he's just kind of sauntering down in his suit and his tie and his tweed jacket. Like he's dressed for a day at the office, but he's just sort of going down this big crater.
That's my favorite thing about this like 50s era is the style was so important to keep that you never see anyone who's not dressed in a like full button-down shirt with slacks on, and it's always funny to see them do these more physical scenes because you're like, bro, just get some good shoes, even. Just like anything that's going to help you out here. But no, he's going down in a full three-piece suit down into this crater.
It's Arizona. And I guess people who live in Arizona will feel differently because they're more used to different temperatures. But I'm like, how are you even walking around in that jacket? It looks like you're ready to melt. Yeah. Like, what's happening here?
I can only imagine. Like, even if Arizona itself weren't super hot, they've got all of these film lights on you as well.
Oh, for sure.
Like, it just must have been a miserable time for them.
Yeah. That said, though, I don't know if they had film lights in the daytime scenes necessarily. The sun's.
I mean, yes, you're probably right, but I do think they would have liked to have more control over it than just waiting for the sun to be in the right position.
I mean, a big part of filming is waiting for the sun to be in position. I mean, tends to be more sunlight plus reflectors. I mean, maybe they did add some extra light as well. I don't know, but like, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, even if it is just reflectors, that's double the sunlight on you still. That's still super warm.
Yeah, but that's like meta stuff, though. I'm talking about even just the character in the scene. Like, you know, this is a character who's meant to be in Arizona, in the desert, under this harsh sun, and he's got his tweed jacket on like it's no big deal.
There's a point later on where we see the aliens who at this point have been transformed, and one of them's wearing like a full scarf wrapped around his neck. And I get the aliens don't know what is appropriate wear at any time, but you'd think they would still be able to get uncomfortable. You know?
Well,
like, I can't imagine wearing that.
That leads into a bunch of questions about how the whole thing works. Like, we'll get to that later when we're actually in that part of the movie, but like, there's some questions. What happens here, though, is that our main guy sees the sort of the door to the ship, because we did actually focus on this after it crashed. We saw like this hexagon. Basically, it's all hexagonal, right? It's all hexagon sort of design.
Space in the future is always hexagons. And it has been since the 50s.
And one big hexagon kind of opens. And to be fair, I did like this creepy moment after it crashed where you just get this shot of darkness and the camera pans and you see like the eye of the alien and it comes out of the shadows. I actually did think that was an effective shot. I think when you focus on the design of it, you can kind of tell that it feels a bit thrown together in terms of like a design. It feels like they've just done like a big wig over this big like floating brain or whatever it is. There's a bit of a weirdness to it. But the actual moment of like how it was captured on film, I did enjoy. But he doesn't see the alien here. He just sees the door. We get like, I think, a quick POV moment of the alien from inside the ship, as if the alien's looking at him, but he doesn't see the alien. He just sees the door shut, and then that causes a rock slide basically in this crater where it gets buried under all this rock, and he's like, you know, potentially dying, and the other two up top are like, oh no, he's in trouble, we have to go try and get him. I'm like, you're not going to help anyone if you're down there where the rocks are still falling. You'd be better off waiting until the rock slide's over and then going to help him.
I mean, even on top of that, just go back to the chopper once all the rocks are done and see if you can get an aerial view of him. Climbing down into the hole seems like the worst possible scenario.
Yeah. If you have a chopper and a pilot, absolutely. Yeah.
Which they do. He's right there. He's standing next to them.
So yeah, but he gets up and he's like, oh, there's something down there. It's a ship from outer space. And the other guy just starts making fun of him immediately. The girlfriend doesn't make fun of him, but clearly like isn't ready to believe what he's saying. She's kind of hesitant and says, well, if you say it, I mean, I guess I'll back you up, but like I can't lie and say I saw it because I didn't.
Yeah. It also, I think around this point, it's implied that the astronomer, these like articles he writes for magazines and such that get accepted, it sounds like he has written about alien life before, because they keep on bringing up the idea of just like, oh yeah, of course you would be the one who thinks that it's aliens, because Mr. Spaceman with your article writing and whatnot.
Yeah, and they get like a couple other guys to come up and look.
I think it's the sheriff that finally shows up around this point.
Yeah, he drives in and they ask him questions and he tries to explain what he saw. And I did appreciate that before the sheriff arrives, though, the girlfriend and the other guy are like, hey, maybe you shouldn't actually say what you told us to the sheriff. Maybe it would just make you look bad. Maybe it's a good idea to just... And again, this is where the movie could begin into a theme, where maybe it was actually trying to talk about something, which is this idea of him sticking to his guns and saying, no, I know what I saw, I'm going to say it, even no matter how crazy I sound. But honestly, other than this one moment where he says it and the girlfriend looks a little like, oh dear, why did you have to say it? Other than that, like, it doesn't matter for the rest of the movie. Like, it's not like a running thing where he's like standing up for what he believes kind of thing. Like, it's not...
Yeah, I mean, it is a recurring thing that people are giving him a hard time of, like, not believing him and saying, like, oh yeah, you got anything else you want to add to your story? And they keep on egging him on, but at no point does it feel like it has a closure to it. It doesn't feel like there's any resolution to that idea. Like, in any other story, it would either end with A, a mental break, or B, him being proved right and people then having to deal with that. Well, but this is just kind of a neutral nothing of that.
Well, that's the thing. Technically, it is proven right by the end, but we just don't treat it like there's a big moment. Like, it should be a big deal when he convinces one person. Like, if one other person sees something that convinces them, that should feel like a big deal. And I don't think this movie has that moment, so it just feels like it's dangling. Even when we get to the point where clearly a bunch of other people know it's all real by the end, we just don't really talk about it. It's left undiscussed.
There's just the implication that he loaded everybody up into his car afterwards and said, I'm waiting for my apology.
But yeah, so yeah, I mean, from here, like, he basically just goes looking down the road and he wants to like find answers or whatever. And we run into some of our B characters. It's this team of like repairmen for the telephone lines or whatever. And they go up and they talk to him and say, hey, have you seen anything weird going on? He's like, nah, not seen anything. That said, though, we are hearing something kind of weird, and one of the guys is like hooked up to the line and he's listening. He's like, yeah, listen to this, and there's like a sort of tapping noise or whatever. He's like, yeah, it's like someone else has tapped into the cables somewhere down or up the line. So he's like, okay, how about we go this direction, you guys go that direction, and we'll see if we can find whatever's doing this.
You're right. You are absolutely 100% that that's what happens. But I cannot overstate how deeply philosophical this phone repairman is. Like, as he's just like, listen to that. Do you hear it? Miles and miles of this cord. It's almost like sometimes the spirit of the air gets inside the cables and you can hear the wind rushing against. Like, bro, do you have like a book of poetry? Do you just want to sell me something? Is that what's going on?
This is back when phone repairmen really believed in their job, okay? They saw the beauty in it, the mamajesty of it. He grew up wanting to be a phone repairman.
I can hear the winds flowing through the wires, and that's why I believe in AT&T.
To be fair, given the time period of this movie and the age of this guy, like, phones would have been a very, very new thing, an exciting thing when he was a kid.
Yeah. I remember the day I personally met Alexander Graham Bell. Greatest day of my life.
Because it wouldn't have been something everyone had in their home when he was a kid, so he probably saw it as a majestic luxury.
Yeah, that's fair. That's the way my grandparents look at the internet.
Yeah. I don't know how true this is, but there's that famous quote from Alexander Graham Bell where someone said, I mean, do you see this telephone thing taking off? And he's like, one day I believe there'll be a phone in every town in America.
Every town. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it probably took him like $1,000 to make just one in order to get the rest of it set up. He's like, yeah, no one's going to be able to afford that.
Yeah, but would you believe, not only everyone got one in their house, everyone's got one in their pocket now, which admittedly, he's got nothing to do with that particular type of phone, but still, it's a descendant. It's it's a carry on from it.
I personally thank John BlackBerry for that revolution.
Okay.
I don't actually know who made the modern cell phone.
I don't either, but I would have said Nokia just because they were definitely a thing before Blackberries.
That's fair.
Are you actually Googling it? Are you checking to see?
Yeah. 1983, the Motorola was the first one to make a cell phone.
Oh, that's like a big brick. That's like a suitcase with like the...
Yep.
Yeah.
Weighed 4.5 pounds.
But again, that was a weird case where, like, you only ever really saw them once in a while in a movie. Like, some sort of bigwig or yuppie would have this big, ridiculous car phone or something, like, in there, you know?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so... It took about, maybe another decade or so before regular people, it was common to start having mobile phones, give or take.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was a period where it was like strictly adults, and then in my sort of like elementary school to middle school era, so mid-2000s, that's where it was like, okay, even kids have some in terms of like flip phones and whatnot.
Yeah, I remember kids getting them when I was, I remember about 2000. But I realized that for older kids, it was probably because the thing that I always go back to is that Scream was 96, and the entire plot of that movie is that all the kids have cell phones in Scream. So clearly, I mean, maybe obviously they may vary depending on, you know.
I was going to say, a town like this in the movie, I think they didn't get a cell phone until 2018, but.
I'm surprised they have a landline in this movie.
All those phone lines just to hook up the one phone in town. That's it.
So, so they go looking, and this is actually one of the points in the movie where I got annoyed at like a bit of writing, right? So the two phone guys, like, they have this moment, and in fact, the main character had this moment as well before they ran into the phone guys, which is that the alien sort of pops out in front of the road and they see it. And when their main character and the girlfriend saw that, it just kind of disappeared. And they got out and they looked around and said, "Oh, what could it have been?" He's like, "Oh, it's just a Joshua tree." And even though
she screams at the Joshua tree, and then it's just a Joshua tree.
We get a POV shot from the alien, and it's like, clearly, like, this thing's pretty big. Like, it can't just hide, which made me think, okay, it must have some kind of, like, you know, predator cloaking or something that's just not being shown, because the way it just appears out of nowhere and then disappears into nowhere is just too ridiculous to not have a reason for it.
Yeah, I mean, we find out later on it does have some level of transformation powers, so there is the implication. I think at one point, even during that scene, they show like a lizard crawling over a rock. I think maybe the implication is it doesn't have to be human.
Well, hold on. More on this later, because like, I don't think it's transforming technically, but that's...
Oh, okay, fair enough.
We've got, like I say, there's a whole can of worms with this alien stuff. But, so the same sort of thing happens with the phone guys here. The alien pops out in front of them, but when they get out, like, smoke surrounds them as if the alien's sort of like gassing them with something. And the scene kind of ends there, right? And we cut to our main characters in their car, and they just stop for basically no reason. It's not like the phone lines have ended, and he just goes, "Something's not quite right." It's like, and she's like, "Yeah, we've not found anything. We better go find the other two guys." Like, why do you think they found something? Could be. Yeah. And they turn around, and I'm like, what motivated that? It's like he just had a sixth sense that something happened. Like, they had a plot development over there, so we have to go and look at it now. There was like no good motivation for him to just suddenly go, "Oh, let's go and find the other two now."
I mean, you're right. I can't fault that, and I can't think of any good reason as to why they would have turned around, but I also can't think of any reason, like, outside of restructuring the movie, how they would have managed to catch back up with those phone guys again. I mean, like, eventually they had to turn around and say, "Okay, we're done looking, let's meet back up." Like, it would have just eventually have happened.
Yeah, but I mean, again, you address that with the dialogue. You say, "Oh, we've been looking for hours. Like, you know, maybe it's time to go back and see if the other guys have seen anything." But instead, it's like, "No, let's go back and see them." But you think they found something? They could have. Like, I don't know. The dialogue really annoyed me in that scene.
Yeah, I get you.
Anyway, so they go back and they find their truck abandoned.
Some blood on it,
and they go looking, and it's the same scene, right, where they actually talk to one of them, like he pops out. Right,
there's one of the electric guys comes up and he like puts his hand on his shoulder, or puts his hand on Ellen's shoulder. She screams again, and then we see it's just one of the guys, but of course he's acting like, "Hello, I am fine, thank you for asking.
I am fine, fellow humans.
Please tell me what your blood feels like."
So he's clearly like either been mind controlled or, you know, body snatched, or you know, we don't know exactly yet what it is. But once our main characters leave, and for the record, our main character, he's very civil with them, but as soon as he gets Ellen to the car, he's like, "He's lying. I think the other guy's dead. I think he killed him. We have to go and get help. We have to go get the sheriff."
He says it so much more nonchalantly than that, even. Like, they get in the car and they have a whole conversation just like, "Oh, well, what happened there?" And he's like, "I don't know." And she's like, "What do you think happened to Frank?" And he's like, "He's dead." And they just drive away.
He says that so confidently. It's actually really funny that he's wrong, because he's not dead. But it's really funny, because then we get a scene where the younger of the two guys is the one that was talking to him, right? I think he's George. And George sort of Frank wakes up. The older guy's Frank, and he wakes up and he looks over and he sees George lying there. But then the fake George that was just talking to the other characters comes around the corner, and like George wakes up and he's looking at himself, and it's like, you know, it's like, oh, so he's not taken over his body, he's just duplicated it. He's just you know, recreated it. And he's like, "Yes, you know, we can duplicate or transform into anything, blah 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 blah." And it's like, okay, fair enough. The main characters get to the sheriff. The sheriff doesn't really want to listen to him. He's like, "Oh, you've said you've seen a bunch of things." But then this time, Ellen's like, "No, I saw it too. I saw their vehicle. Like, it was weird. There was blood. We have to go out and find it." And it almost immediately cuts to them arriving in the desert. The truck's not there. There's a little bit of blood in the rock, but then there's a dead, like, coyote or something round behind the rock. So it's like, oh, it's just that. You look like a bunch of fools. So the sheriff's like, I'm going back. Let's go back. So we see them arrive back at the station. And it's like, okay, we're going backwards and forwards. This is where that really started to like get on my nerves in the movie. And again, we do that a lot.
It did hit for me as well, because it did feel like it was just a bunch of driving. But this scene felt like it was kind of trying to build up this sort of Chicken Little kind of story of,
yes,
he keeps on saying, hey, there's aliens, I've got proof, and then there's never any. And it's always this thing of the world is seeing him as more and more paranoid, where he's getting more and more desperate to prove what is actually happening.
But after this, though, it doesn't matter that much. It's not that long after this where that just is kind of dropped, and the sheriff just kind of starts believing at least that there's something wrong, even if it's not specifically what he's saying. So, that's frustrating, but it does that. And it's when they're back in town that they see Frank and George walking down the street. And the sheriff sees them there as well, and he kind of smirks like, aha, I knew that guy was he's crazy. He thinks they're dead. No, foolish. And our main guy follows them down into an alleyway. He kind of loses them, but then he hears the door creak, and he turns around. And I noticed Jack Arnold, the director, who did a fun little thing with the camera, where he had the camera like behind like two planks of wood that were like sort of along the top and bottom, and then the camera tracked in so it was going through the fence to get a cleaner shot. It was very nice. It
was also imitating that shot that we initially saw from inside the spaceship when the door closed, to let you know that like, oh, the aliens are also in here.
Yeah, I guess this was like also a use of the 3D, because I suppose those two bits of wood going past the camera might have looked all right.
Yeah, possibly.
Maybe. He's been more subtle. He's been more restrained. I respect that.
I'm still just waiting. I'm so used to like those really crappy 80s ones where they just have like again, a kid with a yo-yo that just aims like right at the screen sort of thing. Yeah, and I really want to see those.
It's called Friday the 13th Part 3. Is this the exact scene you're talking about?
Yeah.
So the two guys are in there, and they both talk like they're, mind controlled or whatever, but they say to him, your friends are okay, right? You just have to not interfere and nothing bad will happen. That's it. That's simple. And he's like, why? Why won't you just like be open? He's like, because, well, we don't trust you. We weren't meant to land here. We crashed. We have to fix things and get going. I mean, honestly, I like, it's hard to remember in my brain how much is in this conversation and how much is in the one at the main entrance that's a little bit later, because they're very similar conversations, just the other one's got more details. But he's like, okay, all right.
I think this one basically just wraps up with the concept of don't get involved and your friends will be safe. Like, we will be out of here, just stop.
Oh, we forgot one of the signature details of the alien, David. Wherever it goes, it leaves a trail of glitter.
Yes, which seems very strange, but honestly, I think it's a good visual cue. It's a good little visual thing of like, okay, it's not something that's hugely noticeable. It's just kind of like a little bit of glittering and whatnot. It's much more noticeable when you're like inside of a house or a town or something like that.
That's the thing. I feel like the only reason why it even comes up is because they want him to be able to realize that the alien's been at his place later on, and that's the only reason why they introduced the fact that it leaves glitter lying around, so that he would know that it's been there.
Yeah, that's fair.
So
I just don't think that it's like intrusive to the story. It's weird. It doesn't make much sense for the rest of like the plot, but at the very least, it's not something where it's like, okay, and people didn't notice this. We didn't notice that there was a like if they had something like slime or something, that would be something where people should be like, no, you would notice that coming out of the crater. That's kind of a big deal.
So here's something I propose to you, David, at this point, now that we have these two guys walking around, is I never got any implication from this movie that there was more than one alien. Which is fine. Fine. Like the idea that so I never got the impression that the alien himself was turning himself into one of the humans. I was getting more that he was creating these drones based on the humans and then sending them out as like, he could control them all. Like he was managing like, ants or something.
I get what you're saying, and I can see the point of that. I think that there's a few lines in kind of the final showdown scenes that argue against that point, but it is the problem of when it's only these two, it makes sense of what you're saying. And when we get the third as well, but by the time we hit the final scene, we find out there's like 7 or 8 of them, and they keep on referring to each other as like we, and are you going to kill us? Which makes me think that these are just individual aliens all being disguised. And we do see one of them lose their disguise as well. Like one of them like de-transforms right in front of Ellen, and also just in front of camera as well. So I think they're each individual aliens.
Oh, okay, actually, I'd forgotten the scene where like, the smoke comes up and then it turns back into the alien. Okay, I'd forgotten that moment. You're right.
Yeah.
No, that's fair. That's fair. That was a fun little sequence, actually,
I mean,
seeing that.
Don't get me wrong. What you're saying is completely valid pretty much right up until the third act starts.
Okay.
Because I think it is...
I guess what I'm getting at then is, because they clearly don't have 2 of these aliens to show on screen at the same time, even though they showed 2 of the same actor, so they clearly know how to fake it.
How to do the split screen,
They could have just faked it, but they never show us 2 aliens at the one time. So my lasting impression throughout the whole thing was that it was just a bunch of bodies being controlled by one alien, regardless of the fact that he is transforming into one of them at least at one point. But you're right, they do say we and us towards the end, but that's a disconnect. It's a disconnect because it feels like they're not being able to show something that should be very visually apparent.
Yeah, no, it feels like if in Jaws, instead of it just be like they only show exactly what we see, but then everyone refers to it as a school of sharks or something like that. It's like, well, no, that's not matching with what I'm seeing here. I'm just seeing the one shark.
Yeah, for sure. So after this, the wives are, well, the wife of the older guy at least, who went missing, actually phones the police and is like, hey, my husband didn't come home. Something's weird's going on.
The wife of the older guy and our Star is Born starlet, who has her breakout role here.
Yeah, she's the one answering the phone calls here, yes.
Yeah.
So at this point, the sheriff starts taking this seriously, and it's like, wait a minute, we saw them in town earlier today, and this is where it's like, I told you, something's funny is going on. Like, you know, they've disappeared, and now the wife's complaining that the husband's not home. Like, there's actually something to this. So this is basically the point where, even though he doesn't like jump in completely and say, okay, I believe you about all this UFO shit, at this point, it doesn't matter what he's believed up until this point, because now he's like, well, I need to take it seriously because there's someone missing. And
the astronomer is specifically bringing up things saying something happened to them. So even if it's not the same stuff, the astronomer's clearly involved to some extent.
Yeah. So that's that. Ellen gets kidnapped soon, hereabouts.
Roundabout.
Okay, for some reason, she gets left out whilst the main guy's working with the sheriff for a while. So she's driving on her own, and she runs into Frank, the old guy that was gone, but he's obviously the alien version. And he gets in the car and basically just like, well, the kidnaps her. Effectively, we don't see it; it just kind of cuts away.
I could not understand what the hell Ellen was doing here. So first and foremost, she's driving down the road. Frank's just standing in the middle of the road. She knows something happened to Frank, right? Like, even if this was actually Frank, it's not that she's responding with any sort of like, oh my God, Frank, where have you been? We've been looking all over for you. It's just oh, hey, Frank, what can I do for you? Sort of thing. And then as soon as he gets in the car, he starts de-transforming and he scares her. And of course, she gives her big scream. But like, I don't know. I feel like there were at least 6 different points where Ellen should have had at least 2 brain cells to rub together here and say, don't stop for the weird man on the road.
Yeah, and they also establish around here that there's this weird thing where they go and steal clothes from whoever they've like taken. And I guess the reason for that is just that the duplicates need some clothes, which doesn't explain why the first guy, the electrician in the desert, like there was a full set. Like, if anything, the one that woke up, the real version, should have been stripped to his underwear or something to show that the alien version had to take his clothes.
Yeah, I mean, they did explicitly say that the electricians went back and picked up some clothes before they left. Like, they showed up back at home and like didn't say a word.
Yeah, but that's
to their
after.
lives.
I'm talking about the desert after the first like.
Yeah. No, you're right. That part should be explained more. I personally would have loved to see that sequence of them just like in their underwear in the scene. I guess maybe you could make the argument that they kept a spare set of clothes like in their truck as well.
I mean, it's not unfeasible for people who do like maintenance work might have a spare set of clothes in case they get dirty because they fall into some or whatever. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just a bit strange, especially since they specifically keep going after the clothes that belong to the person they've taken. So they go and get clothes that belong to Ellen, and later on, when our main guy comes home and he's like, oh, the alien's been here. Later on, we find out it's because they've made a duplicate of him. Like, the leader is him later on. And
yeah.
I think the weird thing about this to me is, like, okay, you're still in their own clothes because you think, well, they're going to fit, I guess. But, like, why do you care if it's a perfect match? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you just get a bunch of, like, generic shirts and whatnot, you know, like, why do the aliens care about stealing their specific owned clothes?
Yeah. It's just one of those things that I think, like, makes sense when you first talk about it, but then as you really think about it more, you're like, there's like 100 different workarounds here that you didn't need to do this specific thing. I mean, really what it comes down to is the same thing as the glitter, is that it's so during that sequence, our main guy can say, uh-oh, they've been in my house and they've made a duplicate of me.
I mean, I guess, but like my problem as well is that it's like, when we see the alien version of Ellen, right? She's in like a sultry dress, and I'm like, why is the alien version of Ellen dressed like she's going to a ball? Like, it's almost like how in like Ghostbusters, Sigourney Weaver ends up in like the sultry thing, but at least that makes sense in context because the whole thing of that ghost or whatever is that it wants to mate with the other one. So it's like, you know, like she gets dressed up from the closet. Whereas here, it's just kind of random, and I'm like, wait, you went and stole clothes, and that's what you picked out? Are the aliens just like, oh, this looks like a hot dress, let's just wear that?
I like the implication more that they have no idea what looks good, and so they just put on whatever they happen to grab first. So you have her wearing like a sultry dress or something like that, and meanwhile the next guy could easily just have like sweatpants on.
So here's the question then, did the alien know how to do all the makeup then? Because all the makeup was perfectly applied as well.
Look, this is the 1950s. Women were not about to show up without their makeup.
Like, I'm just saying, like, there's inconsistencies. In fact, you mentioned the scene earlier that I'd forgotten where we actually see, like, the one guy turn back into the alien, right? Where the smoke comes up and then, like, the eyes there and then you see the whole thing.
Like, what happens to the clothes?
Yeah, he was wearing clothes and he transformed. Yeah. So, the clothes, like, alien matter that's part of the transformation, or isn't it?
For the sake of the story, I'm going to say no, and that's why they had to take, like, multiple sets of clothes, because they would have to keep on, like, transforming out of them and then having to get on a new set. For the sake of what we see in the movie, it just disappears. So, sure, why not? It's part of their transformation thing, and they just really like having clothes. Really
strange, because, like, are they going to stay in human form when they get back on their ship and leave? Because that doesn't seem right. So, and that's the other thing with this, is that the conflict to me feels very forced in this movie, because once we get down to it and like, okay, Ellen's been kidnapped, some of the guys that work at the mine have been kidnapped, there's like a professor that they try to ask for help early on. It's a nothing scene, but him and his assistant get kidnapped as well. So there's a whole bunch of them now. And the main character goes to the mine and tries to talk to the alien, and the alien's like, look, we've got Ellen, and no harm will come to them as long as no one interferes. We just want to fix the ship and get gone. And I'm like, okay, this is an interesting path to take down, because you're not saying that they're actually threatening. They've not harmed anyone yet.
Yeah.
So you're taking away all of that potential threat, all that potential menace. Okay, fine. You're less of a horror story then. Whatever. That's okay, as long as then it becomes about something else. But it all just kind of comes down to, like, they tell the guy here, just don't interfere. Stop anyone else from interfering, or we will hurt the people you care about. And it's like, okay, fine. But at this point in the movie, the only way we get any tension is if he goes to the sheriff and explains this to him, and then the sheriff's like, nah, I don't trust him, we should go in guns blazing. And that's it. Like, if he had just not told the sheriff what he'd heard and just sort of like stalled for... Because that's the thing. They say that it's only going to take till tonight. It's only going to take till like midnight tonight, and then that's it.
Well, okay, so a few things on that. First, I do actually really like the concept that this is not an alien threat, nor is it aliens coming down to, like, share knowledge or anything like that. I like that it is just a completely neutral, like, nah, man, we crashed on your... Like, we broke down, and we just want to fix it. I like that concept. And then expanding out from that, the kidnapping stuff obviously seems very aggressive. It seems very much whatever. But from their point of view, they know they have this morphing technology, and they are just looking to get the stuff they need, because they list off earlier on in this movie that everything that's been stolen or grabbed by these people is all like copper wire and electrical stuff. It's all stuff that has to do with repairing something electrical. So it makes sense that they're only kidnapping these people so that there aren't 2 copies of them running around town in order to like keep attention that's drawn to them to a minimum. So I'm down for that. In regards to what you're saying about the conflict here, I think they set it up semi-decently in that the sheriff is the one who drove him out to the mine with the implication that he was going to find them. And when he came back, he had all this new information. But if he shares that new information, he basically has to admit, yes, I found them. So he either has to tell them everything's going to be fine, but we can't go after them, or he says, I didn't find anything at all, and we should start panicking more.
I mean, this is just the start of this problem, though, is like how it begins. Because if this was the point, and now we're admittedly like less than 20 minutes from the end at this point when this arises, but I'm like, okay.
Which very much shocked me. I thought there was so much more.
If this is the core idea that the movie's going to then kind of like make its big ending on, is the idea that all the humans have to do is just have a bit of faith in like the aliens that have said everything will be fine as long as you don't interfere and we won't hurt anyone. That's interesting because it's asking humans to trust and not go in guns blazing, which, you know, is tough for humans. It's tough for, you know, like there's a couple of scenes later, the sheriff in this town is just handing out rifles to a mob. Like he's ready to go. That's what he immediately wants to do. He wants to go and get a mob. And I think what's so weird about it, and part of why it feels weird to me in terms of how it progresses, is that our astronomer main character actually does kind of convince him to like not do anything. The problem is that the next day, right, and again it's that night where it's going to be finished, they only needed like 24 hours, there's basically almost a nothing reason that just makes the sheriff just instantly change his mind and go, you know what, no, I'm going to go do the thing, I'm going to get the mob. And all it is that he sees one of the characters, one of the alien versions of one of the guys, like one of the electricians, walking through the town, and he just immediately wants to intervene. And I'm like, see if there was actually a build up to this, and there was a definitive thing that made the sheriff not want to trust it. Like this is like a weird thing to like just immediately jump to here. But you could almost turn this into something as strongly from a science fiction like exploration of like human behavior as something like Dawn from the Planet of the Apes. Like, see if you just made this about like all the seeds of doubt that are understandable to make him not want to trust, and make it this thing where we can actually 50-50 from an audience perspective, where we kind of sympathize with both sides, or you know, like you could do something really special with that. But it's only in the last 15-20 minutes of the movie. The reasons why he flip-flops are pretty slim at best. So it's hard to get really emotionally invested in it or really care. It feels like it's just flipping the switch because it's time to do that part of the plot.
Yeah, I feel like the movie was trying to do what you were talking about, though, in that they gave him an emotional connection to Ellen. They made it so that this isn't something every time he's justifying it, he's not justifying it in the way of like, they're aliens, we got to kill them because they're just bad or whatever. He's doing it because Ellen has been captured. He's doing it of like, she is in danger. Why don't you care? You are someone who theoretically cares about her, and you're just letting these aliens keep her. But I do think that where the movie falters a little bit in that is that it makes it so that we're so sided with the astronomer that there is no redeeming factor. Like, we know the astronomer is right, and we know that that's the safest way to progress, is just to let them do their thing. We don't take the alternative route of seeing from the sheriff's perspective of, okay, but what if they're lying? What if they're wrong? We don't get to see them from that sort of threatening perspective.
Well, I think there's that, but even if they'd gotten both those ideas across, which would be better, I agree. It still has to bubble and like rise between them in a way that's a lot more natural than it actually happens in the movie.
Yeah, there's like one conversation as they're just looking out this window where he talks about how most murders happen when it's 92 degrees out or something like that, which it's a solid little monologue. It feels like it's a nicely written passage in a book or something like that, but it feels like that is the equivalent to everything. Like, he starts out the scene being like, nope, we're going to do this the way the astronomer wants. Even if I'm not happy about it, we're going to do it. And then by the end of the scene, he's like, we're beating the crap out of each other just so I don't go and shoot this alien dead in the street. Like, so yeah, there's not really a bubbling period like you're talking about.
See, if you set this up like much earlier in the movie, or the movie was much longer, so there was more time to play it. Like, you could play with this idea of the astronomer feels like he has to like shadow him to make sure he doesn't go and do the thing, right? He's like, oh, I'm going to like stick by you to make sure you don't go and ruin this and get her killed by going in guns blazing. But of course, after this moment, where to be fair, the astronomer does punch him to stop him from going out and attacking the alien guy.
Pulls his own gun on him as well.
Yeah, and then afterwards immediately hands him it back and says, I'm sorry, it was the only way to stop you. And the sheriff's like, and that's the thing, it's not even just like the sheriff's made a choice here because his beliefs of like overtaken. It's more like he's just pissed off at the astronomer. She's like, well, you know what? Screw you now. I'm going to do it my way because I'm mad at you, rather than because I truly believe this is the right thing to do necessarily. So he immediately goes outside to a street corner and says, come in, guys! And he gets a mob to form and then hands out rifles and they're like, okay, we're going to go and cut off the electrician / alien dude that's, the alien version of Frank, who's driving back to the mines with whatever supplies he's bought.
I'm curious how he managed to convince all of these people. It's like, hey, guys, you know Frank? You know the guy who watched your kids and did football games with you and whatnot as we were growing up? We're going to shoot him dead in the street because he's not who he says he is.
Well, that was the thing. They go out, they drive through the desert so they get in front of him on the road, and they all just stand in a line, and when he gets close enough, the sheriff just says, all right, open fire, and they all just start firing guns. I'm like, right, these guys just took your word that this guy that they seemingly have known like for however long is just to be killed on sight. It doesn't work, obviously. He just drives around them. Seemingly he can tank the bullets.
He can tank the bullets, but then for some reason, he then like ducks down out of the way and then swerves into a rock and his truck explodes in a fireball.
Yes.
So as much as it didn't work, he still died.
He still died, but the bullets didn't really do a whole lot. It was more just happenstance. Well, I mean, they caused it, but you know what I mean? Like, it's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, the autopsy's going to show death by incineration rather than death by bullet wound.
Is there even a body? I don't know. These are questions that need to be... But our main guy is stolen the sheriff's car and is driving out to the mine to go in to warn them that this mob is coming.
I love that bit in the town, though, because he just hops in the sheriff's car, and then the posse's like, Sheriff, that guy's taking your car. And he's like, whatever, we'll deal with him later. Let's focus on killing Frank.
Yeah. Because obviously I was thinking, that's not going to slow him down. He's got a mob who have all got their own cars. I'm sure he'll get out there just fine.
Yeah.
But, so we get this whole thing. He's into the mine. And he gets to like a sort of ravine in the mine that's got like a big drop down to some water. And the alien version of Ellen's in her sulky dress over in the other side. And she's like, you lied. He's like, no, I'm here to warn you. I'm not with them. I'm trying to warn you that they're coming. Like, please don't hurt Ellen or anyone else. Like, please don't. And basically, he almost falls in because he didn't notice this drop. And he's like, wait, you wanted me to fall in there. Why? And she ends up pulling out this magic wand that shoots laser beams. And is like, because you lied. Humans aren't trustworthy. Blah, blah, blah. And he sort of... And this is the thing that really annoyed me. Is that this is the character, our main character is the one who's been saying we shouldn't get violent, we should work with them, we should understand them, we should try and save everyone with no violence. And as soon as she's remotely threatening, he does a roll and starts firing off his pistol like no tomorrow. Like, he has no hesitation here just to unload his like 6 shots into her, and she falls into the ravine or whatever. And they do like an effect where, like, when he looks down at the water at the bottom, there's like a sort of bubbling effect as if whatever the matter the body's made of is like dissipating in the pool. So, like, it's a cute scene because of the sort of fun old school special effect when she fires the laser beam. But from a character perspective, it frustrated me because it felt like he should feel more conflicted about this. It felt more like he should go for cover and maybe try yelling while she's still firing at him or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I feel like his character was never meant to be a pacifist. I feel like he was always meant to represent the don't shoot first kind of mindset. Like, don't instigate. It's okay to respond to threats, but it's not something where you should go in and just immediately blind fire sort of thing, Yeah. There was a conversation that we kind of skipped over right when he was convincing the sheriff not to do anything. And he points out a little tarantula that's just crossing the desert. And he points out to it saying like, hey, sheriff, that spider, why does it frighten you? Like, what's so scary about it? And he lists off saying, yeah, it's different. That's the whole reason why. We're scared as humans of things that we don't understand that are different than us. And that doesn't make it right. We shouldn't be killing things just because they're different than us. And that seems to convince the sheriff for the time being, but obviously it gets the better of him later on. But I think that's kind of indicative of his mindset, where he's not saying if the spider bites you or if like a snake comes up and bites you or whatever, to just take it. Like, you do what you need to do to survive, but it's don't just kill it for existing's sake.
Sure, but I feel like there's more of a reaction and just immediate dive roll and shoot to kill. Like, it felt like there should be more of a debate, or at least more of an emotional like reaction to the fact that he's killing someone that looks like he's the love of his life. Like,
oh yeah, that part was weird. The fact that it took the face of his girlfriend or whatever, and he's just like, whatever.
Yeah, it just feels very nonchalant about it. One thing that we did gloss over that I do actually quite like, because it makes me think of like something that would be like a random Star Trek Next Generation episode, is when the aliens say, no, we weren't meant to be here yet. We just kind of crashed by accident. Oh, yeah. He says that like one day we probably will come here to make first contact, but your species just isn't ready for it. You're too hateful. He doesn't say the word hateful, but he's kind of implying that. He's implying that we're too narrow-minded thus far to actually try and engage in interplanetary relations.
We're a bunch of monkeys that figured out how to split an atom. Yeah. We got to take some time.
So I appreciate that element of it. It's just kind of a quick mention, but I do like that. And it ends up being the entire basis for the last speech of the movie, where the main character looks up at the stars and goes, oh, they'll be back one day. When we're ready, they'll be back.
The end.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, there's a little interstitial in between there, though, of actually wrapping up the plot.
Oh, yeah, of course. I was just jumping to that because it leads right on from that idea. The actual main thing here is after he kills the Ellen alien, which is awkward to say.
Yeah.
Alien Ellen. Alien.
Perfect.
There we go. Alien Ripley. Okay, I'm going too far. All right, so he finds where they're fixing up the ship, and he sees all the alien copies working on the ship and the various doohickeys. And he comes in, he sees himself. The leader is himself, an alien version. And he's like, hey, I'm not with the mob that killed one of yours. I'm here to warn you. Please don't hurt anyone.
I mean, I did kill one of yours, let's be clear. But I'm not here to kill the rest of you.
And he's like, hey, see this energy source that powers our ship and flies us through space? It can also be used as a weapon to like wipe out like cities and shit. So, we'll just, do that. And he's like, look, the mob's coming. Let the people go. Let me take them back outside. It'll show some faith. It'll show some trust and say, hey, you let all the victims go, and I will hold them off until you're ready to go. And this will be the one like bargaining chip I have, is that, hey, they let the humans go, so I'll be able to convince them not to take them in. And he's like, yeah, but we don't trust you. He's like, well, if I don't do what I'm saying, then use your weapon there to wipe us all out.
Let me introduce you to a little concept called mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
We got a great running track record of that on American and Russian soil. So trust me, it works.
Well, I feel like in 1953, I wouldn't say it's a great track record. I'd say it's in the early days of like,
that's fair.
It's just starting to bubble,
Just testing it out, just seeing if it'll be something we can work with for the next 50 years.
I feel like when you get to the Cuban Missile Crisis, I feel like that's the turning point where it's like, okay. After that, I think, okay, we've had a good run of mutually assured destruction.
Yeah. That's fair. I did really like, though, this, basically what the alien was saying here, which was, it wasn't so much that they want to destroy the city or like they're pissed off at humanity or anything like that. It's strictly that because they see how horrible humanity is and that we're not ready for anything yet, they're actually doing it to like destroy their own technology than anything else. They're like, look, we can't let this fall into your hands. We're going to blow it up. And it may just happen to affect the entire surrounding area as well. But again, that's got to happen. That
is a good, solid idea. But I think it has to be, it has to be developed more. It has to be deepened, because frankly, if you tell a story here where these aliens who are passive by the end of the story are like, you know what? You humans are kind of awful. and like we kind of have to like do something about it for the good of the rest of it. Like almost like Day They Are Stood Still, but instead of like coming here with that mission, just landing here by accident, but realizing it as you interact with us that these humans, like, we have to do something, and it being kind of like, again, a message of like how all of our worst impulses are actually leading to our almost destruction by this alien force. You could do something with that, but I think they really have to emphasize, they have to really talk about how, okay, you know, you humans have treated us so badly. Like, I think there is something there, but again, it just never does enough with it to feel like we're actually getting a solid. I imagine Bradbury's like original pitch probably did have like a more clear defined thing there.
Like the nuances between, I mean, depending on which way they wanted to go, whether or not it was the paranoia aspect they were playing up more, or this idea of humanity is just crappy like that. It could have gone either way.
The idea that we want to destroy anything that's a little bit different because it's weird and because it freaks us out, you know?
I mean, based off of Bradbury's other work, especially like Fahrenheit and all that stuff, I feel like it's probably the latter more than the former, because, you know, humanity's not great with differing opinions.
Yeah, you can apply that to anything. You can apply that, obviously, to the powers during the Cold War. You can apply that to races. You can apply that to ideologies. You know, you can apply it to just about any divide you want to. And like we said, we're in the early days of the Cold War here, relatively speaking. So, yeah, it's... That said, though, when you actually stop and compare it to like Day They Are Stood Still and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which are two of the very best 50s sci-fi movies, the gap in like quality in terms of like the script and like hitting its messaging, and those movies are still 50s movies. They still feel like they've got some, you know, things that are of the time, some characters and dialogue that still feel very old school, that doesn't feel as natural by today's standards. But they have a lot of things that are also like reaching ahead, where they're really pushing the envelope and pushing forward. This isn't really trying to do that. This is content with just being hopefully a fun movie. I think the plot is it's just a bit too backwards and forwards and never really settles on something to focus on to really feel like that's what the point of the movie is. And if you want to be a movie where townsfolk are being replaced by aliens and have it be like some of the main characters noticing that, then do that movie, but it feels like it's only kind of a chunk in the middle. If you want to do a movie where it's more about this one guy convincing everyone else not to attack the aliens, that's a great idea for a sci-fi story, but it's just sort of shoehorned in that last 20 minutes. If you want to do a monster movie where it's stalking the desert and like attacking people, it's kind of doing that for like 10-15 minutes, you know, after it first arrives, but it never quite feels like it takes one idea and runs with it and tries to do everything it can with that concept. It just keeps shifting. And as a result, you never get settled. You never feel like you get a full meal out of any of it. So
and I mean, I don't think it's even something that you get to that point by the end of the movie. I think I was feeling that kind of shifting nature in it, like halfway in even.
Yeah.
It feels like even at that point that it's not going to really lock down on something. It's not really got a core theme that it's exploring. And again, it's almost the paranoia around that part, but the moment that they have a third party come in and just verify that it's all completely true, it's just, it's hard to explain how quickly it evaporates from the plot. It's just gone in an instant.
It's funny, we just did an extra reels on not a 50s movie technically, it was 1960, but we did Beyond the Time Barrier. Check out that on Patreon if you want to get the full scoop. But, you know, we said one of the biggest problems in that movie is that it kept deflating any sense of conflict. Every time like some conflict might have been introduced, it completely just neutered it immediately. This isn't quite to the same extent, but it does feel like it has, like, you can tell that era maybe had this problem where writers just didn't know how to actually like create proper conflict and have it be the central focus of why the story was going forward.
I mean, I would like to go back and look at the Hays Code specifically of like things that were and were not allowed, because obviously there was the Comics Code Authority around the same sort of time period that was influencing what kind of comics could be put out. And if you actually read through like the list of things that are not allowed to happen, it's astounding that any stories were told in that period of time, because it seems like they take out all sorts of what kind of conflict or like actual messaging and moral can be made. And I know the Hays Code was also pretty restrictive on a lot of that sort of stuff. So I'm wondering how much of this was just maybe kind of trying to adjust and figure out like, okay, we're in this, like, we're trying to explore these different dualities of man sort of thing, but we can't really get too deep into specific themes because we're held back by the ratings board.
I mean, that's a fair point to bring up as a challenge, but I would counter it immediately by saying, but then explain the other good movies from the same time period.
True. Yeah, true.
Like, other movies were able to deal with that and still make good, compelling, thoughtful films.
It's the reason the Body Snatchers people play ignorance. They're like, no, there's no deeper morals. We were just having fun.
Yeah, but they were saying that for decades after when there was no...
True.
So, it's very strange, very strange.
Yeah.
But, I mean, like as much as I've mostly critiqued this, it's not a bad watch by any means. Huh. It's a pleasant enough movie. It has some nice desert locations. The practical effects are entertaining enough to watch. I mean, they're not great, but they're kind of like fun in a cheesy way. You know, like, but it's definitely a movie of its era, and it doesn't really have, you know, this is not a classic. This is a B movie of its time, and if you like checking out old B movies, you'll find some stuff here. But I think there's better ones. I think Tarantula, I'm pretty sure, is better than this. I'm pretty sure Incredible Shrinking Man's better than this. Like, you know, even just in this director's own filmography, I think this is a bit further down the list because it's a bit wonky in terms of its story. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really argue the point at all. I think I agree with me and you. Basically came out of this in the same sort of vein. I think that I do think that the special effects in this, and this is someone who hasn't seen a lot of 1950s stuff, so maybe they were better than the way I'm thinking of them as, but I do think that they had some pretty decent stuff going on here, all things considered. I'm not saying that any of it like totally stands up the test of time, but there was one shot in particular that really got me, which was when he first goes down into the crater. It's just, you see the very vague outline of him and everything else is just foggy. And then very quickly the fog starts fading away and it reveals just a single black hexagon wall there. And I'm sure a lot of that was practical effects as well, but I think that there was at least a few shots in this that had a vision to it. Like there was something where he did have like a really good idea of what he wanted to get across.
Oh, well, that's not special effects. That's just cinematography. Right. That's just
yeah. But I'm saying even with the special effects, like with the monsters and stuff like that, I'm sure that if I really wanted to sit and think on it, there could be some sort of deeper thing as to like, okay, why is its primary focus the big eye? Like you said, maybe it was just about the 3D. Maybe it's something deeper for the themes. I don't know. But it strikes me that everything that went on in this felt like it had some level of intention. It's just the actual delivery at the end just fell flat. I don't think that they quite managed to go through and reason out like what the morals and messages could be.
Yeah, and even if you try and like sort of backdate some of the subtext from Invasion of the Body Snatchers, since there's kind of a body snatchery thing going on here to an extent, it doesn't even work because the force that's doing the duplication doesn't actually want to keep them that way and doesn't want to, because the whole thing about Body Snatch, at least part of it, is that they're losing their individuality, right? They're just becoming the drones that the system wants them to be, kind of thing. So yeah, it's a B movie through and through. So yeah, there you go. What were you rating It Came From Outer Space?
Oh gosh, so once I finished it, I was bouncing around like a 6-ish, give or take, and I don't think there's anything in our conversation that really changed that. So the question is where exactly around 6-ish. I think I would probably put this at, I'll just say a flat 6. It does 5.5 feels like it's a bit too low because there is still at least something to it. I would put it above the average mark for sure, but saying 6.5 just feels disingenuous. It feels like I'm looking deeper into the movie than is actually present there. So I'll just give it a flat 6.
Yeah. I'm kind of in the same range. I'm also debating like exactly where to land. And the one, I feel like I'm leaning towards a 6 in the sense that it was still kind of an easy, pleasant enough watch despite anything else. It's just don't look for anything deeper, thoughtful. But at the same time, I think of some of the other things that I give a 6 that I like a good bit more than this as well. So I think maybe by that logic, I'm going to say 5.5.
Okay.
So I'm going to say it's over that halfway line, but only just.
The last thing in terms of filming wise that you gave a 6 was Dune Part 2.
I mean, I wasn't even mean specifically sci-fi, but
fair enough.
Because I've got a lot of slasher movies that are
Yeah.
Things like this. I mean, and to be fair, I would say Dune Part 2 is a better film than It Came from Outer Space.
That's a bold statement, Pete. Why would you say something so brave and controversial?
That's not the meme, is it? It's why would you say something so controversial and yet so true? I think that
I don't know. Look, that meme is at least 6 months old now. It's vacated my brain.
Oh, it's way older than that. That's been around for years.
Well, I'm saying since the last time I saw it.
Oh, right. I don't know. So anyway, next week on the show, David's got his homework to talk about. Don't worry, we'll get to that in a second. But next week on the show, we'll be looking at a new movie from last year that just never got done in the show. It was when Tara was like wrapping up her final episode, so it was kind of weird to slot in a new movie because we had kind of everything we were doing planned out. And then by the time David was on board, it was like, well, we've got other things to do. So we're finally looking at The Creator, which was a big release last year. So we'll be looking at that next week, and we'll see how that is. So that's cool. I mentioned earlier, of course, you can support the show over at Patreon. You can get a bonus content. Me and David do 2 monthly bonus shows on Patreon. We do the Criterion Cut, where we review movies from the Criterion Collection. And at the $5 tier and up, we do the Extra Reel show, where we do some of the worst things ever made. Hopefully so bad they're good, I always say. And sometimes it is so bad it's good, but not always. And like we said, Beyond the Time Barrier was the most recent one we recorded, and that is actually a sci-fi movie. So some of them end up being sci-fi, but just sci-fi that will never put on this because it's just too obscure and shit to do that way.
Yeah. Oh God, I'm still wondering what this show would be like if we didn't have that and we eventually had to have done Neil Breen on the main show.
Oh, yes. We've done, and technically some of Neil Breen's are sci-fi.
Yep.
Technically he's doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sense.
Oh, boy.
Anyway, so yeah, go check out that. Like the video on YouTube, share the podcast with your sci-fi friends, whatever it may be. Thank you for joining us. But David!
Yes?
What was your homework movie? And did you do another 50s era film to go along with it?
Sorta, kinda. So, I'm still trying to like egg my way towards a lot more 80s films because that's just something I need to get done. But I noticed the description on one of them was really, really, really good for a 50s one. And that is a young boy who is obsessed with 1950s movies, sci-fi movies, gets a blueprint in his brain for a spaceship, and then he talks to his friends, all cast by Joe Dante. It's Explorers.
I was wondering if you go. You were kind of describing something else, and I'm like, but we've not done that in the show yet.
Nope.
So on you go.
Yeah, so Explorers. I didn't even realize it was Joe Dante until like 10 minutes in when it finally came up the Joe Dante credit. I was like, oh, hey, look at that.
I thought you were going to say when you saw Dick Miller and went, wait a minute.
Well, yeah,
because Dick Miller is in all of his movies.
Yep. But yeah, no, this the IMDb little synopsis on this did not give anything. It gave maybe the first 20 minutes of this movie, and then from there on it's completely just on its own sort of stuff. I will say it followed the beats I expected it to right up until probably about the halfway point, and then it just took a hard left. Like, it turned into a completely different movie. However, strangely enough, very, very similar to It Came from Outer Space in a lot of ways. Beyond that, it's a fun movie, but I can't say that I really felt I don't know. It didn't feel like it had a drive to it. It felt like it was, cutesy. It was some cool ideas that were being driven out. It did some very good special effects for the time. Some very early CGI work in regards to like in the scene, moving stuff around. But all in all, I think I was just kind of a little bit disappointed once it did make that hard left, because much like It Came from Outer Space, it just felt like any sort of messages or things it was building up, it kind of just threw out the window for some fun and whimsy.
Well,
so
something I actually didn't know until we did the review of it is that the film wasn't finished. They basically said, okay, you're not getting to finish it, and they had to like put out what they had, which I never knew. I grew up with this movie, so I've got a fondness for it. I watched it a lot as a kid. It was right next to Goonies, and it is very much as Goonies in space. That's kind of what it is. And it came out the same year, I think. So it's not like it was even like, oh, the next year they rushed out a sort of Goonies clone or something like that. It's just one of those things where it kind of came around the same time. I like the movie a lot, but I have a lot of fond memories of it. It's got a great young cast. You got young Ethan Hawke and so on in there.
Ethan Hawke, River Phoenix, and then the third boy in the group, which, Jesus Christ, having to stand up against those two. Good luck to that kid.
Well, you wouldn't have known that at the time, though.
I know, but like just looking back on it, you look at that cast list and you're like, and there's Jason Presley. Wow.
Oh, dear. Well, it does. The third act is definitely different from the rest of the movie. I still have fun with it. It's definitely not my favorite part of the movie, but I don't know, the idea of the dreaming of getting to space and like the can-do attitude of going on the adventure, I'm really into all that stuff.
I guess I kind of was expecting from the first 2/3 of the movie it to end up more like Flight of the Navigator kind of stuff, rather than the direction it did go into, which, again, it was fun. It just felt like such a drastic turn from the rest of the movie that I don't know, it was kind of like an emotional whiplash in a way. I was just kind of shocked when it ended up actually appearing, But no, overall, I think I probably am going to side with Tara's original rating on this. I'm going to go ahead and give it a 7. Still solid. It's still a very well-made film, and I think the CGI holds up fantastically, all things considered. But I'm actually not surprised with the idea that they had more stuff in mind that had to hit the cutting room floor just for like time purposes or whatever.
Yeah. Also, to this day, whenever I'm eating a muffin, and I take 2 bites out of it, it ends up kind of looking like a spaceship.
Oh, okay, I see it.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, that is one weird line I wanted to bring up. So their spaceship, they just salvage parts from like a junkyard or something.
It's like a part of an arcade ride. It's like a football helmet.
It's a tilt-a-whirl. It's like this thing that sits around and spins on like a carnival ride sort of attraction. Yeah, and the fact that you don't recognize that is actually more shocking to me, because that's the part that I was going to say is, who the hell hasn't heard of a tilt-a-whirl? Like, the kids explained, one of the kids was like, oh yeah, it's from this weird ride called a tilt-a-whirl. And I'm like, what the? Dude, I ride a tilt-a-whirl like every year for my entire like kid to adolescence age whenever I went to a carnival. How is this something that is not more widely known?
I couldn't have named it, but
that's weird to me. All right.
I think the more specific thing about the design, though, is that it's clearly it was like an American football themed ride, because it's in the shape of a big football helmet, which they then like build a front onto and turn it into a little spaceship.
I see what you're saying. It's not like, it is in the same shape, but it has nothing to do with football at all. It's just the way that they set it up. It just spins around. I don't know how to explain it better.
But it's got like a back and like a roof on it. It's got like a shape to it.
Mm-hmm. It's a big bowl, and then there's wheels on the bottom that, as it like rotates around, the center of mass is like just barely off center, so that way it like whips around really quickly as you hit like the edges of it. It was part of my childhood, and the fact that they referred in this movie to it as like, I think it's called a tilt-a-whirl. I'm like, God, kids.
Well, I'm on their side, because I don't know this either.
I'm realizing I'm the odd one out now, and that's weird to me.
Must be
Leave in the comments, is a tilt-a-whirl a thing that you have ever ridden before? Because I swear to God, I'm not alone on this.
I've Googled it. I'm looking at some images.
Yeah.
For the real life version. Yeah, I can safely say that I have not seen one that looked like that. There's probably a similar ride, but not one that has that same sort of back bit.
Okay.
On it.
Yeah, that's been on all the ones I've ever ridden. So.
Yeah. All right.
Anyway, 7.
Very good. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, there you go. That's the Atomic Cinema Experiment. Like I said, creator next week. Look forward to that. Also, next week, we start our new season on our other movie podcast, The Collector's Cut, where we work through seasons, which is like franchises of movies. Or in this case, we're starting 90s disaster season next week. So we'll be starting that with Dante's Peak and going from there, building up, of course, to Twister, which will then lead us into Twisters. So if you haven't checked out the Collector's Cut for the non-sci-fi stuff we do, you can find that over there. Go and have a look. But that is the show, so thank you very much for joining us. We always appreciate it. Keep watching science fiction and computer ad salsa.